I first learned of Haida Gwaii back in 2017 when I took my motorcycle all the way up to Alaska. And unfortunately at that time, it was pouring cats and dogs. So being on a motorcycle and heading out towards some remote islands in the rain didn't quite have the same appeal. The week-long voyage up through British Columbia to the port town of Prince Rupert, where the ferry leaves for Haida Gwaii, could well have been a story in itself. Passing through a land of mighty rivers, steep forested mountainsides, glassy lakes, bucolic farmland, and a coastal range of glaciated peaks, the port town of Prince Rupert once again emerged from a heavy veil of rain and mist. Over an 8-hour ferry crossing the next day, more favourable weather conditions prevailed and were to last for the duration of my stay on Haida Gwaii, which can be translated as Islands of the People. Haida Gwaii sits approximately 60 miles off mainland British Columbia and is often referred to as the Galapagos of the North. It is one of two major West Coast islands and remains to this day in relative obscurity, while Vancouver Island has become a household name. With a rich cultural history and great natural beauty, much of Haida Gwaii is rugged and relatively pristine. Temperate rainforests of ancient trees with thick carpets of moss and lichen cover steep mountainsides, and a bountiful marine environment envelops the archipelago. There is a primal quality, a mystique to these densely forested islands, the bulk of which are only accessible by boat. Immersing yourself in Haida Gwaii is also to embrace its colourful and warm residents who collectively honour nature, respect each other, and treat you as a welcome guest. There's a spirit of inclusivity here that seeks to balance the needs of people and nature while respecting traditions and heritage. Haida Gwaii could be considered more of an adventure destination, with cultural and eco-focused tourism now contributing to an economy that was primarily centered around fishing, logging, and mining. There are a handful of restaurants and food stores spread out over the few populated centers, and basic visitor infrastructure is in place, but generally speaking, amenities are focused more on the practical needs of its resident population. These warm island people are of a self-sufficient nature, adaptable, hard-working and resourceful, sourcing directly from the bounty of the land and sea. Arriving here with a modicum of self-sufficiency and a good pair of hiking boots could be considered a practical strategy. My original 6-day return ferry ticket ended up being extended to 19 days. There's such a wealth of opportunity for outdoor exploration via roads, hiking trails, beaches, rivers, marine sanctuaries, and iconic cultural heritage sites. I found it to be one of the most compelling places on the planet for all of these reasons. For simplicity's sake, let's split Haida Gwaii into two main sectors: the North Island, referred to as Graham Island, and the South Island, known as Moresby Island, both of which are connected by a local ferry service, and each has one regional airport. In the north, there are 5 main towns, and one on the South Island, and approximately 140 kilometers of paved roads link these centers. Additionally, an extensive network of gravel forest service roads crisscross the islands and are suitable for most vehicles. The lower third of Haida Gwaii is known as Gwaii Haanas, meaning beautiful islands, and these lands have the highest protected status as national park and marine conservation reserves, encompassing important Haida heritage sites, one of which is designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This pristine area is only accessible by boat and visitation is on a limited basis. A handful of sanctioned tour operators lead guided trips to Gwaii Haanas, and they are an excellent way to access these magical lands. The Haida were a seafaring nation of master canoe builders, fearsome warriors, and respected from southern Alaska to Washington state. Historically, Haida life developed within a framework of sustainable hunting and gathering, with a deep respect for the island's bountiful resources. Unfortunately, life changed quickly and dramatically since contact with the white man, a horrific story that resonates the world over for indigenous peoples. In a short period, the fur trade obliterated the sea otter population. Missionaries brought Christianity, which called for the dismantling of iconic monumental poles from villages and a re-scripting of traditions and practices. Smallpox reduced the original 30,000 residents to 600. The Canadian government imposed laws designed to outlaw Haida culture and split families and communities through the residential school system, while turning a blind eye to the logging and mining practices that were rapidly depleting the land. Slowly but surely, the Haida are regaining the helm of self-governance and steering their islands and culture securely towards a new era. There is only one road that accesses the western side of Haida Gwaii and leads to a protected bay called Rennell Sound. Here, I met Donna and Claudette, local women who shared with me all sorts of great advice about places to hike and explore. Local knowledge is key, and I certainly make a point of seeking it out whenever possible. Well, I couldn't have asked for a more magnificent day to attempt this Sleeping Beauty trail, which leads to the top of the peaks that overlook Rennell Sound, where I was yesterday. So the view from down there at the Sound was magnificent, looking back at the mountains. So this is my opportunity to invert that view and take a look from the top back down onto the water. These trails are considered difficult and strenuous, and there's at least a 2,000-foot elevation gain to get up to the top. But you know, once you're up there, from what I've been told, the views can be as far-reaching as the British Columbia coast, which is probably, I don't know, a good 60 miles or so. Further on down the trail, it was clear that logging had taken place, as most of the trees were very small in caliber. And a little further up the trail here, thankfully, we have reverted to some old growth forest, some big cedars, some big Sitka spruce. And finally, the summit reveals itself after a very steep and arduous climb up through some very rocky and root-bound terrain. What remarkable vistas up here on the top of the mountain, all the way to down to Rennell Sound and far beyond. I gotta watch where I'm stepping when I'm doing this, because the top of this mountain is pretty small and it's very steep. But anyway, suffice to say, we made it. Fabulous hike, and looking forward to many more like it. Well, this morning's hike is taking us along the Pseuda trail alongside the Tlal River out towards the ocean, and we're going to be following the land north at that point up to a shipwreck about 4 miles from here. This was a log-carrying cargo vessel that ran aground in 1928. And the remnants of that are clearly visible at low tide. So this is, in fact, one of those hikes that, if you're not careful, you can get caught out by the high tides. So knowing when those tides are high and low is important for this particular hike. Well, though it wasn't necessarily the best outcome for this particular ship, it certainly left us with a monumental, beautiful piece of sculpture. The golden spruce was a 300-year-old tree that stood on the banks of the Yukon River outside of Port Clements. It was a genetic anomaly, the only one of its kind in the world. Lacking 80% of the normal chlorophyll concentrations found in Sitka spruce, and blessed with perfect conical form, this unique specimen stood out like a yellow Christmas tree amidst a forest of green and held great significance in Haida folklore. In 1997, this legacy tree came crashing down. Equipped with a chainsaw, Grant Hedwin put an end to an era. With a long career in the logging industry, he was actually protesting the clear-cutting of Haida Gwaii's ancient forests. This decisive act had its desired effect of illuminating the destructive industry practices, but also brought the wrath of the Haida Nation against him. A short movie that chronicles this fascinating story can be found on YouTube. Today, all that remains of this legacy tree are some cuttings that 30 years on are still a pale reflection of this once magnificent specimen. The most northerly point on Haida Gwaii is known as Rose Spit, and to reach it requires either an off-road drive or a 10-mile beach hike. This narrow finger of low-lying land projects out into the Hecate Strait and is subject to the full force of storms. That said, it does offer a rare perspective whereby you are viewing both the north and east coasts of the island simultaneously. Next, it was on to Moresby Island, where a highly anticipated trip down into Gwaii Haanas awaited. A 4-day, 3-night voyage with Moresby Expeditions saw me join as a last-minute add-on to a small group of 9 other clients and 1 guide. This voyage was certainly the highlight of my visit to Haida Gwaii, and included time in remote, secluded areas of incredible natural beauty, offered many opportunities for wildlife viewing, and accommodated stops at all 5 Watchmen sites, historic Haida villages where communities once flourished for centuries before the smallpox epidemic. Today, what remains of these strategically situated village sites are overseen by local Haida people whose directive is to watch over their significant heritage sites, while welcoming visitors and leading very informative tours of what are highly sensitive areas.
And the eagle up there on the top to represent the mountaintops.
Gwaii Haanas is sacred and central to Haida culture, and after the standoff at Windy Bay in 1985, where protesters finally put an end to logging of the old-growth forests, the islands were subsequently designated as national park and marine conservation areas. In 2013, a new 42-foot-high monumental pole was carved and erected at the Windy Bay site, commemorating 20 years of managerial partnership between the Council of the Haida Nation and the Canadian government, ensuring future generations will always have access to this superbly preserved and protected sanctuary. Though I tend towards a lot of solo travel, the organised trip to Gwaii Haanas afforded me the opportunity to spend time with a wonderful group of dynamic people, sample fabulous food along with great accommodation at each of our overnight stays, and receive informative history lessons along the route. All this and much more expertly led by a young woman named Mia, who is an exceptionally capable and magnanimous guide. Before departing Gwaii Haanas, there was one more objective nearby that would assist me in forming a more complete picture of these magical lands. A view from the top of Mount Moresby, the highest point on Haida Gwaii. For all its prominence, Mount Moresby is not a tourist destination, nor is it even part of the Haida Heritage Trail system. It is difficult to get to, and the route to the summit is very poorly marked. The 3,000 feet plus of elevation gain from the trailhead to summit is very challenging and strenuous, and receives little foot traffic. But once again, the far-reaching views from that high vantage point out over the islands and surrounding water were ample reward for the effort. This is my third morning with this view. It's just an ever-changing landscape out here. The light, the tidal ebbs and flows, the different birds you hear, the animals you see, the fish that jump. It's just an incredible place, just filled with life and beauty. That said, I believe that if you were to visit here, being self-contained in some fashion, having your own tent, bicycles, a way of getting around and storing some food is definitely the way to go. It's very much a local island. And even out here in some of the more remote, a little less accessible places, the people who you will generally find here are locals enjoying their landscape. And people here really do appreciate the environment in which they live. They love the place, and I can see why. It's just one of the magical places on this planet.